Yeah. Hi, I'm Michael Clark, data scholar, seasoned industry advisor, and also a visionary. My area of focus is the future of data as a currency and what that's going to mean for all our lives. And it's an incredible pleasure to be here on the Voices of the Future.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. We are at the Voices of the Future. Michael Clark, what a guy. I mean, I saw him about a month, 6 weeks ago, and he was vibrating at a completely different level. His mind works at such a speed. This is the exponential brain that we have to be looking at into the future. And I dare say a lot of new things are going to come in. I think he's not doing justice to himself by just calling himself an advisor and a visionary. I think he's much, much more than that. And we will delve deep into all of those aspects today and see what we come up with. I have no idea where we're going with this, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun in the process. Michael, real pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the privilege of your time. And it's just that's super important. I mentioned that you are vibrating at a different level. You actually seem to be vibrating at a different level. Tell me, what's the engine? What's igniting you? What's charging you on a day-to-day basis?
Do you know, that's the ultimate question, I think, for all of us. I think that when we look around the technology today, the convergence is happening, which is a common conversation that you have, I'm sure, quite a lot.
Yeah.
There's almost this feeling of, do we really know what we're walking into? Do we really know the implications of what's happening? Do we know the opportunities? And have we covered all the bases? And I think one of the angles that became a priority for me was the data itself. It almost became a purpose, if you like, to say, well, how do I protect governments to make sure that they are prepared for the future? How do I make sure that businesses are also prepared, understand those implications, but also understand the opportunity? But more importantly, what does it mean for you and me? Mm-hmm. And almost that gave me that purpose to say, well, if no one else is going to do it, why can't it be me?
It's interesting, when you just look at data and from a sort of very generic perspective, it just seems to be a microcosm of a much, much, much bigger picture. And then you look at data and then you drill down. But what I'm hearing from you is actually that's the core, that's the baseline. And then from there, you can connect and permeate all sorts of areas. Is that how you see it?
100%. And actually, the mistakes we've made with data began at the very start of computing, right? If you go back to the origins, we talked very much about the power of the machine. Mm-hmm. So it was this huge drive to make it do more, which means we needed more power. Mm-hmm. And as we created more of this wonderful artifact called data, guess what? Now we created more storage. Mm-hmm. And that storage demand increased over time because we could create more.
Yeah.
But the reality was the hero of our story was lost, because we became obsessed with tools and gadgets and so on. But to your point, the hero was always there, which is data. Mm-hmm. And the irony was, it's not hardware and software that's the platform now. It's data's the platform. And we're now plugging things into our data. That's the world that we're heading, where data itself will now be the platform. Almost like the gadget is the fan waving in the distance.
I see. Michael, we'll go into it in much, much greater depth. However, I think it's wonderful to understand your story. So tell us about little Michael. What inspired him at a young age? What kind of a maverick were you? Were you naughty? Were you disruptive and breaking things as you were growing up?
Oh dear. Where to start? I think a great place to start is 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So 10 years old, I'm sure like everybody, we got our own, if you're old enough to remember, I got my first computer. So I remember my dad coming home with this white shiny object. The keys weren't even indented, right? They were completely flat. Yes. And I turned the green screen on and I was absolutely hooked at 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Noughts and ones, you remember the day, you couldn't even do anything without a book. I would spend hours coding to create a hangman, and then it got a syntax error, and then years later I realized that was a spelling mistake. So all those years of shouting were over. Yeah. And there was a point in my life then where it was almost always different. Mm-hmm. Like I've got pictures of my school photographs when I was 14 and I was the only guy in the grey shirt. Right. Everybody else was in white. Right. As I got older, I realized that we need more people in the grey shirt. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I realized. Yeah. And then throughout my life then, I was a lifelong learner. So I'm self-educated. Mm-hmm. So I almost became a learning machine after school. Right. So for many people, the learning stopped at school. That's when mine started. Mm-hmm. It was almost like pulling every book I could think of, and then learning how to piece a puzzle together, which was the real skill that I acquired.
Yeah.
And the ability to tell stories. So I got involved in some of the biggest corporates in the world, working on the very beginnings of data. So, very big projects for corporate banks. But I was always involved in the cutting edge of that. But the data was the common thread that followed me through my whole career, till I got to the point where I'd done everything in a company, even to the point of building products based on data.
Yeah.
So it was this common ally that was always there. But it's only since the convergence of technology, it's almost like there was also a convergence of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's almost that puzzle I'd pieced together through my life was now suddenly becoming relevant.
But your superpower that I can see coming out from all of this conversation and the few times that we have met is that you're a storyteller. You're actually being able to put together the stories. And a lot of people who are doing your kind of work are appalling at that. and therefore they make it boring. While you make it interesting, I become curious, I'm ready to listen. You're using jargon like heroes and villains, you're creating a plot. What's the thinking behind all of that?
I think, let's be honest, right? The topic itself is a little bit dry.
Yeah.
Right. If we ever speak about data, we often get worried what's going to turn up through the door.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be honest. So if I'm going to look, let's go back in time before I get there. If we go back in time, the way we talked was through the power of story. And for some reason, as we got older, we lost it. We almost lost curiosity. We became obsessed with what we were told, or facts and figures became the story. When actually, even with the book that I'm writing, I made a conscious choice, and even when I speak, is make something relatable. Because you and I both know, we spend a lot of the time in the future.
Yeah.
But at some point, you've got to come back from the future and take people with you.
Yeah.
And I think the power of story, and stories that are funny, engaging, but still embedded with fact, keep people engaged, but also they feel part of the story. Because our job, quite frankly, is the storyteller in everything that we do. In some respects, I want them to forget me because I'm more interested in them exploring the story, and I'm just laying the table. And eventually they get there themselves and go, oh, okay, now I get it. Oh my God, I need to do something. But no, I think that the choice of story for me has always been there, even the way that I present, because at the end of the day, we're describing concepts that are sometimes so far out there. If you can't ground them in something that's relatable, it will never land.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, and this actually whole venture, endeavor, movement is 100 stories of people, and it really is exactly what you're saying. Let me tell you a backstory about how the origins of the book and the whole platform that I'm creating, and that is that the media calls me voice of the future for obvious reasons, and so I, as a futurist, I sort of felt very flattered, and they said, "Why don't you write a book and create a podcast, Voice of the Future?" And guess what? I fell for my own bullshit, and I started writing. And I'm like on chapter 2, and I'm saying to myself, this is not who I am. I'm not narcissistic and self-absorbed. It's about me and my future and how I do it and what do I have to say. And that I was not comfortable with me. And in a moment of reflection and introspection, I came to the point where actually it's not voice of the future. Just add the letter S, voices. And the moment I did that, everything changed. It was an explosion of opportunity, of engagement. And as a futurist and as a speaker, I'm all over the world. So I have the ability to get some of the amazing people coming on board. And that's how the energy of this book and this environment started. And then it became amplified voice, amplified consciousness, total impact, to make a difference. And I'm actually about making a difference. And so this is the backstory of the story that we
It's really funny you say that, because although I was speaking stories, when I got to write my book, I suddenly became someone else. It's almost like I had to become some academic to prove I was really clever so people would buy my book. And at some point I realized, like you, hang on, this is not me, right? So I kept the facts, but then I just overlaid it with metaphors and humor. And actually I made it a conversation. Like I was speaking to the reader, and now it feels like something that I would read, rather than something that somebody clever is trying to make themselves sound clever. I think that can happen when you write a book, because you almost feel like you have to be a version of yourself for the outside world, but actually what people just want is a good story.
Behind you, there are a lot of books from my mentor, Professor Tony Buzan, who sadly passed away. And we're going to be celebrating him posthumously in the book. and learnt everything from him, really. He was the inventor of mind mapping, and he created Mensa and things like that. But one of the things he said to me, and he called me a maverick, an eccentric, and I called Tony an eccentric. And he said, "Do you know what eccentric means?" I said, "I think I know what eccentric means." He said, "No, you don't. Eccentric, the actual word means off center."
Yeah.
So he said, people like you and I are off center. We are the outliers. So I created a platform for charity and social help, and this is called MAD. MAD was Make a Difference. And he says, it's the mad people on the edges, you and I, the mavericks, the outliers, and that's what Steve Jobs recognized. And that is who we are, and we are the ones who bring about change. We're the ones who will challenge the status quo. We're the ones who basically are going to shake the trees and move on. And I see you as one of them, and that's why day one I resonated with you in terms of how this thing is coming together. So moving forward, going back to data, I see in a very sort of simplistic kind of way, data as the new oil. But I put a little thing on that, and I say, well, the oil price is $100, but rocket fuel or Formula One fuel, racing fuel, is around $1,050. That's 12x the core data. So by fine-tuning it and synthesizing it and packaging it and enhancing it and all of those, you are now 12xing the value of oil. But with data, you can go even beyond. What are your thoughts in terms of data being the new oil and taking it from there?
So I had this really funny conversation with someone. I won't name this person, but he said to me, look, so everybody told me what data as the new oil was, but I never knew what it meant. Right? Everybody doesn't know what it means. So giving your example, I think there's also a deeper problem is we've lost our view of what value is. Right? I can go to a supermarket and buy a bottle of water for 50 cents. I can then go to the gym and buy the same bottle of water. Now it's going to cost me $3. I can go to the airport. It's now going to cost me $5, and I'm going to go to a 5-star hotel. It's going to cost me $6. But it's still the same bottle of water. So, in all examples, when we think about trying to compare price to data, we need to remember that now we're moving into a world of data ownership. So now we have to think about intrinsic value again. So one of the big ahas when I was looking at data was we also, unfortunately or fortunately, need to relook at the role of value. So whether we like it or not, we still live in a world of productivity and efficiency as the key measurements of success. If you look back at bartering systems, that wasn't the case. Intrinsic value was based on the value it held to you, the historical relevance, the age of an artifact, which is the age of your data, right? How unique it was. So how unique is that data set? And when we start pricing in the market, that's going to drive the demand, right? Depending how unique it is. Today, it's about uniformity and scale, right? If you think about data monetization today, which is a big topic, which is new, you'll be told often that it's all about scale, right? But that's not true. We need to move to value-based pricing. So I may have a piece of data that would 10x your piece of data because actually that piece of data solves a disease or an allergy. So we almost need to think differently. So yes, data is the new oil, but it's an oil that's a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic value, but not from the industrial age. I think that's the learning we need to make because all of a sudden now the parts are more valuable than the whole. That's the key.
Indeed. I'd like to address two big pillars, and then we'll drill deeper into the conversation of how your book is shaping and some of your insights. The first insight, I start my presentations, and my second slide is what I feel will define the future. And to me, it is trust and the value of trust and truth and ethics and transparency. So that trifecta of trust, truth, and transparency is really what I feel defines the futures. As a futurist, that's what I talk about. So firstly, what are your thoughts on that, and how does that fit into your framework of life?
So in short, everything. Right. So we spoke about this when we met, and it was like, very much thinking in the same way. I think, look, if I'm exchanging my data with someone, if I don't trust you, I'm not sharing it. So the other piece of the puzzle we've not talked about is the role of data and identity. Both of those are co-linked with each other. For example, in the future, I may go into a new community and I don't know anyone. And maybe the reputational score of people in that in that environment is maybe 5 out of 10. So guess what? I'm not going to reveal too much of myself because I don't trust people in the environment, right? And then we go back to ethics, and we talked about intrinsic value, right? One of the intrinsic values to me might be sustainability in the environment, which comes back to ethics, right? So in a data economy, price is not always the answer, right? Because if I don't trust you and you don't have good ethics, I'm not sharing my data with you, whatever you charge, whatever price you want to offer me. So all of a sudden now, trust and transparency becomes the common thread in our future, because the generation that follows us has a completely different measurement system. They now think about the environment, they think about trust, they think about the power of community again. It's almost like going back in time, right? And then as we then progress through the data journey, these core values will not only dictate how we exchange, but it will also dictate what the business of tomorrow looks like. Because all of a sudden businesses need to look in the mirror and go, are we doing enough to be trusted? Are we an ethical entity, right? But also, are we sustainable? Are we transparent? In a data economy, for the first time, there's nowhere to hide, right? Because a smart contract is going to dictate whether you share my data with me or not, because I'll define those rules embedded. So to answer your question, it's everything.
I'd like to take that a little bit further, because there's a huge trust deficit. We don't trust our governments, we don't trust our institutions, we don't trust the environment that we work in, because most of our institutions were created 80 years ago: United Nations, World Bank, IMF, World Health Organization, and for a different problem, to solve a different issue at a different point in time. They're not being able to cope with that today at all, but we still have to somehow hang on to those institutions. What are the new institutions we need to create? What is a new set of data smart people like yourself to be able to say, this is how I look at data, this is how I look at AI. We'll get into AI in a second. Because I find that we are just not equipped to be able to handle this. And we've seen, obviously, all of us have seen the hearings at the Senate and so on, which is embarrassing. That those are our leaders and those are our policymakers, and they don't have a clue. So what kind of new institutions, new structures, new environments are you proposing, suggesting that we can have?
I'm not going to reveal them all, because obviously you still have a book. But there's a utility layer that is missing today, which is where data turns into value. These are the companies that make sure that what flows into the ecosystem is valuable and works, right? But then there's also a layer above that, which is missing today. Now, I'm describing in the book a data ecology, because I'm comparing data almost like plankton, right? It's self-sustaining, it evolves, it changes shape and form every time we change shape. It's almost like we're creating an ecology. But in the base of overarching any ecology is a biosphere, right? Which is where everything will make sure everything works, everything runs effectively. What's missing today is everybody's trying to go alone. It's almost like we're trying to retain the symbolism of, right, this is the regulator, this is corporate business, and they now still trying to struggle along governing a world they no longer understand. I always make the joke, if money ended tomorrow, we'd know what to do, because we made money and we can reprint it. If Google fell over, we wouldn't have a clue, because it's beyond the regulator and it's beyond government. The new world we're heading to requires a collective. It's a collaborative effort, right? So in the book and the biosphere, I'm describing it's not one entity. Yes, it's an entity, but it's a collaborative effort. Because if you think about it, our world is fracturing. So data across border will become even harder. So how do we make that happen is because we set guide rails and principles, but as a collective and a collaboration between industry, even between people who own their own data as subject matter experts with government. It's the only way. And I also will say this, when it comes to AI or blockchain, we need to look beyond the tool. We need to understand how it fits into society and what it's doing, and also how it fits into the other regulations that are being defined. Take the AI regulation that was done by the regulator. Great thing to do. But does it fit into open banking? How does it fit into the policy for open data? I don't know. So we almost want them to also not only work together, but start thinking breadth as well as depth, and how these things interconnect, because it's this interconnection that's given us AI through convergence, and the convergence of industry as well as technology of combination. Chuck in exponential growth, all of a sudden no one can keep up. So we need to think differently about the problem, but also apply a macro lens to the problem.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I constantly find that on a day-to-day basis, being challenged with this. Now, looking forward, what are the kind of frameworks we need to look at in terms of identity, in terms of personal data? So if you think about personal data, we basically relinquished our asset and gave it all away 15, 20 years ago to social media, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly enough, you said that we can ask Google for our data back. They'll be happy giving our data back because the intelligence is already in the algorithm. How does that work? So effectively, we have given our lives away?
In a way, yeah. What is data really? It's your memories, it's your stories, it's you. Every interaction we make when we wake up in the mornings, when we go to bed, is a piece of data. In fact, 1.7 megabits of data we create every second, which is crazy if you think about it. If you did that times across the planet and you do the math, that's a lot of data, that's a lot of selfies a day, right?
Yeah.
The key is, with all of this, we've given away a lot more than we think, because we separated data and identity, and we never, even legally, I believe, data still isn't classed as property, right? So it's this black hole of, is it yours, is it mine? I freely gave it away with consent. In certain laws, in Brazil, for instance, there's a ninth principle that's not in GDPR, which is, I want to know what you did with my data after I gave it to you. Yeah. So now people are starting to think about it. But you're absolutely right. We gave away a lot more than we realized. And for what? Maybe to see what we look like when we're 60, or because realistically, when we're FedExing our data to someone, what we're doing is giving them a value care package. That's what we're really doing. We have our data because the Google example you described is Google don't want your data. They want the value that they can derive from it to evolve the algorithm. And I think that's the educational journey that's going to take place. And we haven't talked about it yet. You talk about regulation, the answer's always been privacy, right? So the constant chase to keep our data private. The reality is the answer is not privacy, the answer is ownership. Because once you move into ownership and you start using cryptographic capability and all the things that are emerging, the regulator's role still is needed, but now it's more about heightened security and more other levels of guidelines and not privacy, but a shift to ownership.
Yeah. Can we go into measurement and how we measure the KPIs, the OKRs that we have? And the way we are measuring things is growth, productivity, and things related to that. In a world of data, especially looking forward, where does that stand?
So this is a really interesting topic, right? So I had a privilege of talking to an economist a few days ago. And even me, I'm always learning, right? So I'm always asking questions. And they came back to me and said, well, yes, we measure productivity, but we've never in the past 20 years ever been able to measure technology's impact to productivity. Right? Because if you think about it, we measure labor, but even if I'm doing the job and technology is helping me, I'm still doing the labor, right? It's hard to gauge what was technology's impact onto GDP. The economist then turned to me and said, well, with AI, for the first time ever, we'll be measuring productivity. Now that's scary in a way, because then if we've only ever managed productivity and other measurements, which more are financial based, what about well-being? What about the environment? What about social responsibility? So I may have the best productivity in a country, but my social feeling is low. It gets lower the more AI goes into place. And then I asked them, if data became a currency, what would that mean then? Would that become a balancer in the economy, right? And also maybe an overbalance. You could see it as an equilibrium, right? So what it would mean is we'd be able to see the impact of data as a currency itself on the economy, but we'd very quickly be able to see the correlation between AI increases versus data increases or decreases. So if AI is decreasing, but data sharing is increasing, that tells me that people are not trusting the AI to share their data. If it's going the other way and it's going down, that means something's not right with our system. So we need new measurements, not just for data, but in general for the world that we're going. I would hate us to be stuck in the accountant's view of the world where we just measure everything through productivity and efficiency, and we lose sight of the fact of the environmental measures, the social measures, even happiness as a measurement, because that's really should be the gauge of how we measure a success of an economy, not just how much money we make and how productive we are, because let's be honest, we don't make widgets anymore.
Indeed. One of the challenges, intellectual challenges that I have, and I would say moral challenges that I have, which I get beaten up regularly about, And that's when I keep attacking hypercapitalism. Because a few people, a few smart people at Google and Apple and other places have figured this shit out.
Yeah.
And there are 50 companies in the world who know this stuff. And then there are the rest of us who are just trying to chase this stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe there's another 100, 200, 500 companies who are good at it.
Yeah.
The rest are just literally just the followers.
Yeah.
In this hyper-capitalism environment, knowing the secret formula and being ahead of the game already, they, by definition, will just keep accelerating and exponentially get out of range. So the top 50 companies will own 95% of the world, and everybody else are followers. Is that a dystopian view, or is that potentially could happen?
I think if data ownership doesn't become a reality, I think that's the path.
Okay.
Yeah, because let's be honest, if open data takes its trajectory as projected, well, who do you think is going to succeed, right? The people who are already spotted the gold.
Yeah.
This comes back to my chapter 2 in my book, right? Because we lost sight of data and its value, we opened the door to people who did. And it's that point then, the years later, the regulator went, oh, what's a cookie again? Oh, we should do something about this, right? And by then it was too late.
Yeah.
We'd already had the implications, personal data was already taken, advertising revenue was generated. So we already know that the fintechs, even the big tech, have figured out the formula because they built themselves on the ground up to take advantage of the formula.
Yeah.
The challenge for industry will always be there. It'll get amplified. We think the regulator thinks open data will be the answer. And yes, it will. It will give some element of transparency, but that doesn't mean a company, imagine you're a company in an open data world, suddenly you're being told you have to give all your data away as well, your open banking data. Do you even have, these companies don't even know the value in their data is.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're being told they've got to give it away.
Yeah.
And the happy recipients will be the people who already know how to fuel the engine, right? Now they've just been given some more fuel because I may like a tech giant more than I do my bank, for example.
Yeah.
That's the danger. So it's almost like, I mean, if you put AI on top of that, you then create an even more closed internet, which is really, you've got a group of people now who actually understand, they've got more data than everybody. They also understand how to use it properly. It's no surprise who's building AI, right?
Yeah.
The tech giants who actually started the whole internet or built on the internet revolution, they're now taking it as the next evolution of software. But what does that mean then for all the other companies who are still playing catch up and may never catch up? It's like almost like they're bringing a toy car to a Formula One race, right? And it's just never going to catch up.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I feel that data ownership is not just a stake in the ground for all of us, but it's almost a leveling that says, well, actually, it's no longer about how capable you are. It's, do I trust you? Are you more ethical? Because now that becomes more important. I think it'll become a leveler. And I think the more people start asking questions about AI, the more people start asking questions, that trust component will be a common component.
Yes, indeed. And we'll look at the guardrails around AI in a sec. But technocolonialism, one of the discussions that we were having was that Amazon, buys Cyprus and Apple goes and buys Malta. And so instead of having political colonial future, we have technocolonial future.
Yeah.
But then talking to you earlier today, you put in another variable in there, and that's data colonialism, and redefining economies.
Yes.
Using that and taking a small nation and basically where data identity is there. Can you just take us through that journey, because it's just fascinating?
So I think, look, it's almost like the Einstein theory, right? If you keep on chucking the same solution to the problem that made it, it's not going to help any much.
True.
So if you look at some of the economies around the world today, some of them are in about a 90% inflation, which means the chances of them getting out of this problem become starker by the day. The only way out, quite frankly, is to reset, which not many people want to do. The irony is, and I've always said this, the most abundant currency we have is all around us. It's the things that we create and the interactions we have. Now, if a country did two things, made its identity a legal right, so everybody has their own digital identity, and then if they turned around and said, right, we're now going to give you data ownership rights, the technology now exists to such an extent that you could potentially rebuild an economy and change the currency. So the currency now becomes data. You may still use the existing currency to drive, returns, or you may use another currency in the world of crypto, who knows? But you have the infrastructure today to bring all that into a country, and all of a sudden, take a country that may have 5 million people who live there. maybe 90% of them have access to the internet and a mobile device. If each person sold a piece of data for $5, you'd probably be making anything between, I'm giving you a range here, about $25 to $30 million a day, right?
It's interesting, and yes, you mentioned a 5 million country, and we're living in a 3 million country in the UAE, in Dubai, and the UAE about 10 million. When 2 years ago the metaverse came out, I was talking to the Minister of AI, and he said, sitting in the cabinet and sitting with the ruler of this country, they said, this metaverse thing is really cool and it's interesting from a different perspective. And it was an amazing lens that the rulers here had. And that was like, we may be a small country in the global context as a country in terms of population, but within the metaverse, we could be the largest country in the world.
Oh, yeah.
So the whole perspective was that let's go into the metaverse and then take over land, take over, space, take over whatever is necessary. And to me, it was fascinating because you can punch above your weight and you can create new environments and concepts. Is this similar, or am I going on the
No, you're absolutely right. It gets down even to the individual level. People eventually will be able to create their own utilities using their own data. They can create their own spaces. Eventually, we will get to a point where you have your own personal assistant running on your own data set, right?
Yeah.
Your own profiles, your own data sets of bits and pieces,
Yeah.
even modular AI, right? I'll be able to go to a marketplace probably. If you look at China, they're building AI models of 6 billion parameters, not 175. So domain-specific AI models. So I can imagine I'll go and buy a health AI and then plug it into my AI data sets that I've retained about me. All of a sudden, I've got my own personal AI. So you can see people using their data to build communities within a space, or using their data to create a whole new set of products to own an environment or own their own environment. But what the ruler said was absolutely spot on, because even cities that are not built in the region, you could create virtual tourism. So even, there could be somewhere in Dubai that's not built until 2026. Well, why wait?
Yeah.
I build a digital twin of that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now I've got a completely different space that I can operate in. So absolutely, individuals who previously were financially poor could suddenly have a place in the world if they have the right to access their data, which is the big thing to solve.
Michael, I'm saying this with absolute humility and total awe in terms of what you are talking about. I speak to some of the most amazing people in the world and people in this book, and to this day, I haven't seen this perspective of the world. So I'm really, really grateful that you're giving us a new dimension that what the future is genuinely about. And so thank you for that. Which really brings me to the problem is that, I'm talking to the extreme outliers and you're an extreme part of those outliers literally out there.
Yeah.
Bringing it back, how do we bring this into our lives, into education, into institutions, into homes and families? I mean, what do parents tell their kids? Yes, we can have this intellectual masturbation here, but what does it actually mean?
It's a really great point. And I'm going to go back to the book again, because there was a conscious choice in writing the book. Every single chapter tells the leaders and governments what to do, right? And this is probably part of the fact that I come from industry, is that, look, whilst we talk about the future, we've got to go back. We can't be on the beach drinking Kool-Aid and hoping people will catch up. Everything starts from foundations, everything in life. Our job is to meet the customer when they arrive in the future, knowing that we figured it all out, right? But to do that, we've got to go backwards. And so, okay, if that's the future that we see living in, what do you need to do as a business right now? What do you need as a government right now? So in the book, I talk about, the consequences of this new economy. So new utilities, new financial instruments. But every chapter says, what do you need to do as a business? What do you need to do as a government? And to answer your question, what do we need to do? For the first time, I think the regulators got to be on the front foot. They can no longer be chasing their tail, right? Take AI, right? They did the policies, that's great. But they acted before it happened, after it happened. So the horse is bolted, right? There was an experiment run where a university did a test where they worked out 1,000 AI images is the equivalent of driving 4 miles in a car, right? We do 20 million images a day on AI. That's 1 million miles a day in a car, right? Gasoline car, carbon footprint. So the first thing in the journey is we need the government to be on the front foot. To your point, education throughout. you need to educate people on why your data is important and what the value is. If we're ever going to get to a data economy and the way we want it to be, the government has to set the guide rails. The government has to make ownership a priority, not spin the wheels and try and solve the privacy problem just to put technology in. So is ownership the priority? Does it really matter? They're almost there. They're starting the journey. They should look to markets like Brazil and others who have gone much further in that journey, and then really start tackling the identity problem, which ironically is already happening. Self-sovereign identity in Europe. So the building blocks are there. We now need to turn the table and speak to the average man and woman in the street and say, well, what does ownership mean to you? More importantly, when ownership becomes real, who should you be sharing with and who shouldn't you be sharing with? What are some of the things that you should be thinking about? And what are some of the values you should be thinking about your data going forward? This is an educational story. It's a transparency story, but it's also a story where we need our leaders to step up. And the role of government is to protect society. So as data becomes a real powerhouse and what we want it to be, leaders have to stand up, but also businesses then have to prepare themselves for a world where they need to be operate in a different way.
But leaders don't get what you're talking about at all. So the level of learning and the delta between where they are and where they need to be, I don't think it's currently is bridgeable at all. Perhaps some smaller countries, some interesting leaders. I mean, let's look at Brazil, because you said they have started this process, the ninth rule. I mean, can you go in and sit right next to the president and say, listen, mate, I'm going to fix this shit for you because you have already started realizing this. You're a nation of 250 million people. If we can do it here, we can change the world. Is that something that realistic as a conversation?
It really is.
Narrative?
It really is, right? Yeah. And I'm lucky because I get to speak to a lot of people around the world in boardrooms, right?
Yes.
And they get it. And the conversation is really, that stuff's coming, right? And that, my argument is always the same to them, right? These are signals. I'm not a fortune teller. None of us are. These are signals that we see, and we've just joined the dots, right? Now, if we look backwards, what I want to do with you is ask yourself the question, if any of this becomes true, are you investing in the right things right now? So the data capabilities that you're building today, are they flexible enough? Are they agile enough? Are the policies that you've defined that run your business agile? Are you an ethical business? Forget the data economy. At the very core of it, people should trust you, right?
Yeah.
So we can have these conversations that lay the blueprint. So then effectively you create the underlying technology that will get you there, but more importantly, an agile business to get you there on the journey. Mm-hmm. So so a lot of my conversations take them on, I tell the story. I take them from where they are now and almost the logical building blocks in a storytelling way that show them the path. Then bring them back from the path, and then I sit down with them and say, right, what are things you've got in place that are working well today? What's holding you back, and what should we be thinking about? Mm-hmm. And by the way, these are some of the opportunities that you're going to get along the way. You have to come back to foundations. You can't live in the future with this stuff. Mm-hmm. It's our job to always be looking forward and be the ones guiding and protecting. But I also think there's another lens, which is also practically helping and enabling, which I think it can be done.
I mean, we have a common friend in Brett King, and he always talks about going back to foundational principles in almost everything that we do. And I dare say that's where you're going with this. Yeah. We've got 100 great voices in here. So we're going to be capturing all of that. But just staying with your conversation, we've got countries, $1 trillion GDP countries. We've got $1 trillion businesses, which is Microsoft and others. I was talking to another person who helps and advises the $1 trillion assets, values, sovereign wealth funds, basically. And interestingly enough, he gave me a quote that saying, to keep people happy and to keep people not go into revolution, we need to keep them busy and we need to keep them working. So here's $1 trillion blob of money, and the important influencers and advisors are saying, we just have to keep people busy. Otherwise, there'll be a revolution as a problem and so on. I'm just finding, when he said that, I found it very difficult to understand, because now with robotics coming in and that intelligence coming in, would universal basic income be an interesting outcome? The data economies that you're talking about could be an interesting outcome. Where does that leave humanity? Where does it leave you and I I mean, you and I will probably be okay, but the vast majority of the people who are the worker bees, I'm not being able to connect the dots.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people have thought about the fact that what does AI need and the robot need to run? It's data.
Yes, absolutely.
So I own that.
Yeah.
Could that become universal basic income?
Yes, because that's my asset and that's my value, and if I can do that, the
But we also
robot's going to
we
work
also
for me.
need to remember that the robot is not going to do everything, and neither
Yeah.
is AI. We need to remember that the world is going to be augmented. So people will always be needed and they'll work alongside machines, but the role will be different. Keeping people busy is not really the answer. That is the problem, right? Comes back to traditional thinking of factories, right? I need productivity and efficiency. It's coming back to that problem again. AI is promising everything, but anybody you speak to will always talk about the efficiency gains or the productivity, not the impacts to the world. I think, look, that mindset with the best intentions comes from an industrial revolutionary thinking. And it comes back from uniformity and scalability and units, right? The more people are busy, the more output I generate, the more income I get. That doesn't necessarily mean people are happy and doesn't necessarily mean we're delivering the right economy.
Yeah.
So I think as time will progress, that comment will erode itself because we will look at things very differently. We will be productive, but we might be doing different things to be productive.
Yeah.
And a payment system, which is, ironically, the more interactions we have and the more productivity we become, guess what? We become more valuable. Because now the data I hold is a form of universal income, right?
Yes.
So if you're saying, well, keep people busy, absolutely. I'll be busy. I'll travel the world. I'll do X, Y, and Z. I'll learn new cultures. I might even learn a new language.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that might be very valuable in the marketplace all of a sudden.
Yeah, indeed. At a very simplistic level, and as we get towards the end of this this fascinating session, is at a very simplistic level with digital technology, with data, with AI. Anything that can be digitized will be, because it's 1 million times faster and 1 million times cheaper.
Yeah.
But my thesis is that anything that cannot be, which is love, compassion, harmony, spirit, heart, soul, judgment, ethics, trust, all of these things, imagination, creativity, common sense, intuition, they're going to be 1 million times more valuable.
Yep.
How do we, in this whole conversation, become more human and let the technologies just serve us, and then we focus on the more valuable components and then literally build a future, a beautiful future around this?
I think it all comes back to value, right? What is value? Because if the things you're describing are a mixture of intrinsic value and the value to the outside world. Love is the value between each other, right? Which is the external value, right? The intrinsic value is loving yourself, right? And how you feel about yourself. So I think we have to go back. If we want to get to that place, we have to extract what does value even mean, right? An example, in the new world, reputation is also a form of value.
Indeed.
Right? I can go into a virtual world. I'll give you a story, an anecdotal story. I may have used this in the talk you saw. Like I've got a friend whose daughter, well, it's I give it away now, but this individual, their daughter sells all their things on Roblox, but never reveals their identity. 180 pieces sold. No one knows this girl is 6 years old because it's all based on a leaderboard and a reputation. I think if we have to get to that place, we have to reframe what value even means in the society that we're moving to. And when we start thinking about emotion, not to scare people, but what Apple did when they launched the Apple glasses was a few things. So the Vision Pro, the first thing is they created a new channel of engagement, which I think everybody would recognize. The second thing is they started to redefine what security is. The third is the most profound. For the first time in human history, we were able to capture human emotion as a data set. Think about it. All of communication, 50% of it's nonverbal. Today, we can't see it. We've never been able to capture it. It's only the things that we can capture, like unstructured images and things like that. Yeah. Now, I can capture how you feel. So let me give you a story, right? Because we love stories.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's say I wake up in the morning and I look at my watch. I'm doing something and I look at my watch. My Apple Watch today knows my temperature, right? And it goes through the roof. Apple thinks I should go to the doctor because my temperature's not so good, right? But if I'd had my glasses on, Apple would now know that I looked at my bank statement. And it caused my stress levels to go up a little bit because I can't pay my bill.
Yes.
And immediately then my AI assistant crops up and goes, hey, would you like a loan or payday loan to cover that? de-stress, off we go. So now, because I can complete the puzzle between why that heart rate acted, why my gesture cues changed, and through sight, all of a sudden that's a different engagement.
Yeah.
So that's why ownership becomes so important, because now we're giving away not just our identity, but also potentially how we feel.
Right.
And that's why all of this becomes so important.
Michael, as we get to the end, you are on this sort of exponential curve of learning, change, development, impacting the world. How do you see yourself evolving over the next, say, 5 years or so? I mean, in our lifetime, that's a very, very long time.
Dog years, isn't it?
Yes. Because my next question is, and I'll preempt the next question, is we're celebrating Michael's 100th birthday.
Yeah.
What are we celebrating? So please answer the 5-year question, and then we do the 100-year question, and then we close.
So it's a really interesting question, because I had this debate a long time. So today my focus is data, because this is where the world has been. My realization is that I'll always be ahead. The skill I have is telling stories and building Lego. So today the problem of the day is data. I've seen join the dots and the signals and no one's talking about it. In 5 years' time, I could be talking about something different because something has cropped up in the ecosystem.
Indeed.
So I think the goal for me in 5 years' time is still being in a position where I am guiding and advising and protecting people. Because the overall goal should always be the same. Leave this place better than you found it.
Yeah.
So in 5 years' time, if I'm still doing that, and I brought people through this economy, and people are now reaping the rewards and the benefits, that's the legacy box ticked in the right way, because I made a difference. And after that, then the goal is to be continually making that difference, whatever that future topic we need to worry about is.
Indeed. Are you optimistic about the future?
100%.
Really?
Like, you know, when I write this book, I get the hairs stand up, right?
Yeah.
Because you're looking and going, my God, like I could help a country rebuild. I could give people, I could solve inclusion. Obviously, that is a big problem regardless, right?
Yes.
You know, let's be serious. We never solved it in banking. We still haven't solved it in data. I think there'll be things like community hubs and sharing of data, that will come. We'll figure that out. But I'm incredibly optimistic. Because look, if I've got my own data and I combine that with off-planet data with the environment, what could we do for sustainability?
Indeed.
So I'm so optimistic of how we can take control of our data. And I want to make this public, is I'm completely optimistic about AI as well. I think AI will deliver us incredible things. But I think if we go through it with our eyes open and doing the right things, it will realize its full potential.
Indeed. 100 years from now, sorry, not 100 years from now, your 100th birthday.
Yes.
We come to celebrate Michael's 100th birthday. So you'll still be looking as young, because all of the longevity stuff that I have seen and been looking at, you'll probably actually even get younger. So every 5 years you'll live another 25 years.
I'm on that track, by the way. I do tell you all that stuff.
Okay. We'll create your digital twin and the whole
That's
thing.
in the book too.
But on your 100th birthday, what are we celebrating? Are you the president of the world? And because you've changed everything and improved it, and climate is beautiful because you use the seed of the data and then you build from there. Where are you, sir?
So it's a great question. I always make the joke, you know, at the end of your life, if someone read the book of your life, would they have wanted to have lived it? I think, look, at 100 years old, I would hopefully be looking back on a life well lived. And the differences I've made, because the journey was never about me.
Yeah.
So at 100th birthday, if I can look back and say, we changed things.
We changed things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
we changed it.
Yeah.
We made a difference.
We made a difference, which is
it's never about me.
That's the essence of what we're doing.
It's never about me. So at 100 years, if we've done all the things that we need to, we've left this place better than we found it, and the generation that follows us reaps the rewards and lives an amazing life, then I think everybody in that book, and you and I, have made the difference that we should be making.
There's very little I can say after that. Beautiful, beautiful statement. Michael, fascinating. I'm overawed and overwhelmed by some of the things I have learned today. But I love your spirit. I love your heart. And that's how and why we connected with each other. And I'm on the same journey of making a difference. And this whole Voices of the Future is about making a difference and collective impact and collective consciousness and how we can do that. And I think your contributions will certainly help towards that. Michael.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. We were just talking to Michael Clarke. What a fascinating story. What an amazing journey. And I dare say you will be seeing a lot of him as he goes around changing the world and doing some wonderful things. And we are very humbled and grateful to have him as part of our Voices of the future. Watch the space. We're launching it in the next month or so. We'll see you there. Thank you.